Because our respondents' bios are not in the folder, I'm going to introduce Dr. David Larson at this point. Dave Larson is professor of ethics and bioethics in the School of Religion here at Loma Linda University. And he has recently just developed our newest master's program, a Master's of Religion and Society, that we're quite excited about. So I'd like to welcome Dr. David Larson.
Well, now, what's been going on? Help me. Did Dr. Fowler give you a red light, an amber light, or a green light when it comes to witnessing in the clinical setting? How many say she gave you a green light? Some? Okay. How many say she gave you an amber-colored light? Oh, quite a few. How many think she gave you a red light? Don't do it. No, not very many. I think most people said amber color, and I would agree with that. But I would add very, very, very dark amber. As close to red as one can make it, right? It's not quite red, but it's very, very close. Why? She gave us several reasons, and I would like to add to them. One is that I think she is aware of the long history of linking evangelism and imperialism. She touched on this, and I think we can underline it again. Secondly, she knows, as we heard from these last stories, they're horrific stories, she knows about people who have religiously abused patients. Thirdly, I wrote this down before I knew she had written the guidelines. I wrote that one of the reasons why she wants to have us have an amber-colored light is that she wants to act in harmony with the ANA code. Well, she wrote the code. No wonder that she wants to feel that way. Fourth has to do with cultural pluralism. She did not touch as much on this, but I'm sure that if we could talk more, she would. Guess how many languages are spoken in Los Angeles County? 242. Guess how many of these languages have written publications? 180. Guess how many languages show up in the Los Angeles Unified School District amongst those students? 92. Each language is the bearer of a culture. And the medical center is the most culturally diverse institution in the world. The second is the international airport. Go down to Tom Bradley and see all the people walking back and forth, and you can see them eating, talking, dressing differently, but they all have access to money. Either they have the money or they know how to borrow it. That's why they're there at the airport. The really poor people aren't there. The medical center across the way here, and every other medical center like that, treats the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor, in addition to all the other diversities that we experience here in Southern California and any other metropolitan area. That's why I say, if you want to see cultural diversity in its most intense form, go to a medical center like this one. Now, there's another factor, though, that she didn't mention, except briefly, and that is we have seen a shift in thinking about medical ethics from Hippocrates, let's say, down to the Nazis and Tuskegee and Guatemala on the other end. Hippocrates' ethic places the patient very much at the discretion of the doctor. The doctor is going to do what's best for the patient as the doctor understands what that should be. But when we have doctors acting like they did in Nazi Germany, and when we have doctors acting like they did at the Tuskegee syphilis study, and as some of them went down to Guatemala and did even worse. At Tuskegee, they were observing syphilis in its course through a patient's life. In Guatemala, American doctors were deliberately infecting patients with sexually transmitted disease. They weren't just observing it, doctors were doing it. One cannot be so sure about trusting doctors. That's why there's been a real shift away from paternalism to patient autonomy. Now, some would say that that shift has gone too far, but nevertheless, let's understand why it occurred. Lots of people have become convinced that they cannot trust healthcare professionals. And they have some justification. Let me underline that word, some justification for thinking that. Okay, so we move from paternalism in Hippocrates, and then we move to autonomy in our own situation. Okay, those are some of the factors that, in addition to the ones that she mentioned, I think may well be informing her point of view. How should we respond? I suggest that we respond in 5 ways. First of all, I think we should respond by saying we would really like to have a longer conversation about a number of things. One of them is the relationship between Christ and culture. If I become a Hindu, I'm likely to pick up a lot of Indian culture. If I become a Christian from an American missionary, I'm likely to pick up a lot of Americanism. Is that altogether entirely wrong? I'd like to talk more about that. What about the relationship between health and salvation? Dr. Fowler drove a wide wedge between those two. What about the relationship between spirituality and religion? Or the relationship between poaching, don't you love that word? Poaching and preaching. Poaching is a hanging offense, she said. I hope preaching is not a hanging offense as well. Okay. Then finally, the difference between ethical relativism and ethical universalism. She did not touch on this, but I think what she said raises the question, and I think it raises the question in a profound way. Think of Afghanistan now. The Americans and the British and the otherwise people are going to pull out, and the Taliban are going to take over. And they are very clear about the kind of government they will institute. Women in this country had better be happy that they're not going to live in the new Afghanistan. Now the question is, are there some things right or wrong for everybody? Or are we prepared to say, okay, that's a Taliban way of life, we as Christians don't see it that way, that's okay for them, this is okay for us? Or are we going to say, even if we aren't going to change it by force of military might, we at least want to stand up and say, that's wrong. It's not just wrong for us, it's wrong for you. It's wrong for you to cut off the noses and ears of girls who disobey you. It's wrong for you to burn them up. And if we can't say that because we are so culturally worried about offending somebody, we're in big trouble. Now, my suggestion is that we spend a lot of time with the book Cosmopolitanism by Kwame Anthony Appiah, Princeton philosopher, born in Ghana, reared in the UK. Lived in 3 different cultures. And his book, Cosmopolitanism, is an attempt to help us understand how we can be respectful of particular cultures while also recognizing that we all belong to the same world. We are citizens of the world, after all. And that's what he wants to say. And Appiah is very, very clear that some things are right and some things are wrong for all of us, no matter where we are and when we are. Okay, so the first thing is I hope we can have sometime a longer response, conversation with Dr. Fowler. Parenthetically, I used to see her more often, but in recent years I haven't. I'm glad to see you again. You haven't lost any of your spunk, and I'm glad for that. Okay, second response. I think we need to distinguish more clearly than perhaps has already been done between implicit and explicit witnessing. By making it very short, by implicit witnessing, I mean witnessing without saying anything. By explicit witnessing, I mean witnessing with saying something. Now, it has already been suggested that the question is not whether one will witness, but how one will witness. The clinician's body is itself an expression of some kind of witness, good, bad, or perhaps middling. How the clinician touches the patient, how the clinician talks to the patient, what's the expression on the clinician's face, how does the clinician smell? We can know things by smelling before we can see them or hear them. All these things matter, whether or not one says anything to the patient. Now, I think Paul Tillich helps us right here. He wrote a book called The Courage to Be, and in that he distinguished amongst three kinds of anxiety. And I think in implicit witnessing, the clinician can be very alert to signals of these three kinds of anxiety. One, the anxiety of fate and death. Secondly, the anxiety of guilt and condemnation. Thirdly, the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness. My hunch is that a clinician can sense those forms of anxiety when they're in the patient's room, and by the way that patient bears himself or herself, and in every implicit way communicates with the patient, that those forms of anxiety can be soothed or they can be multiplied, increased, intensified. I shared this with my wife, and she said, well, Tillich's pretty good, but he didn't get it all. And I said, well, you're going to improve on Paul Tillich, aren't you? She said, yes, by the way, I am. So, okay, what do you want to add? She said, you know, he talks all about what's happening to the patient, but often, she's been a chaplain, often patients aren't so worried about them, but they're worried about what will happen to those they love after they're gone. So I said, tell me more about that. And she explained to me how people may not be fearful, right? Anxiety and fear are different. Fear quite specific, anxiety quite general. People may not be fearful about what will happen to their children or their spouses or so forth after they die, but they have this vague, general anxiety. If one asks them, what are you concerned about? I'm concerned about what will happen to my loved ones when I'm gone. What do you have in mind when you think about that? I don't know. I don't know. But something bad might happen to them. Well, I think my wife might be prepared to add something to Tillich's list. So we thought about it for a while, and we came up with this. This is the anxiety of apprehension and panic. Me wondering, what's going to happen to my children when I'm gone? What's going to happen to my spouse? Will I have enough life insurance money to keep her going till she dies? I'll tell you something. I am apprehensive about that, and sometimes in the middle of the night I feel panicky about it. I don't want my family to be left destitute when I'm gone, but I cannot guarantee at this point that that will not happen. I don't think it will happen. I'm doing all I can to make sure it doesn't happen, but that anxiety of apprehension, sometimes becoming panic, is something I know, and I suspect maybe I'm not the only one in the room. Okay, third response. Let's talk about explicit witnessing. Here's probably where I'm going to get in trouble. But I think there are times when a clinician can and should speak to the patient about things of faith. And I am not a clinician. I have not studied spirituality. All I've done is think about this. And I've come up with the 3 guidelines, all right? Here they are. A-R-E, spelling R. I hope if you don't remember anything else from what I say tonight, you will remember this. A-R-E, all right? Say it with me. A-R-E. One more time. A-R-E. Okay, we're getting there. A. Answer. When somebody says, do you believe in God? And you do, I hope you say, as a matter of fact, I do. If somebody says, do you think God's punishing me with this cancer for how I acted when I was a youngster? I hope you say, no, I don't believe that. When somebody asks for something, I hope we answer. And when somebody asks for prayer, if prayer is within our frame of reference, I hope we pray. Now, some of you know I have my troubles with the way miracles are frequently defined. I believe in miracles, but I think a lot of people who believe in miracles are superstitious. And I have found it appropriate in a situation like this to say to a patient who asks me to pray, I'd say, listen, I'm a Christian minister, and I'm happy to pray with you. But I want you to understand what I think is going on here. Most of the people in this hospital are not going to be supernaturally healed by God. We need to understand that. And the likelihood that you will be supernaturally healed by God is not very great. Does that mean we shouldn't pray? No. But it does mean we need to know what we are going to pray for. We're going to pray for wisdom. We're going to pray for courage. We're going to pray for strength and skill and so forth. And if it's God's will, which it usually isn't, that we be supernaturally healed, that will delight us. But that's not what we're going to pray for. And you know, I've never had a patient say, no, if that's what you're going to pray for, don't bother. Actually, they seem quite relieved. They know what the numbers are, how likely it is that they'll be supernaturally healed. If they know it, why can't we know it? Why can't we talk about it? Okay, first, answer. Second, respond. Now, by respond, I have in mind something more than just a brief answer. Something more elongated. And also I have in mind something responding to something that may not be presented as a formal question. You know, I think God is punishing me for how many boyfriends I had when I was 17. I don't think God does that sort of thing. Now, if you want to hang me for being that explicit in a clinical setting, go ahead and do it. I think it's appropriate to correct people's misunderstandings of God in a responsive way, not a long lecture, but one can say, you know, do you think God is going to burn me forever in hell? No, I don't believe God would do a thing like that. Or, my aunt is in heaven looking down at me, and she is very, very stressed out about what's happening to me. You know, I don't think it's that way. You don't have to worry about that. So not just a brief response, a brief answer, but a more gauged response. Here's where I would put prayer in general. Prayer in general, as has been indicated, ought to be a response to the patient's request. But the patient doesn't always ask for it in words. And so the clinician needs to be very discerning to tell when a patient would probably favorably respond to the invitation to prayer. Now, how can the clinician do that? Well, I'm not sure. But lawyers don't ask questions of their witnesses on the stand until they're pretty sure what answer they're going to get. Right? Men proposing to women marriage and women proposing to men marriage don't make those proposals till they're pretty sure they're going to get a yes answer. Right? Likewise, don't ask if you can pray for somebody unless you have that same kind of confidence. Sometimes proposals are denied, right? And sometimes an offer to pray is denied. But I think responding is not merely a matter of reacting to things the patients say, but it may also be a matter of discerning what's really going on. Third, explaining. There are times, I think, when the situation is right, that the clinician may take the time to explain why he or she does or does not believe something. Not merely what, but why. Now, these are very rare opportunities, but I think that when they appear, I think we should take advantage of them. Two quick stories from me. I was in one of the medical centers here for minor surgery not too long ago, and I mentioned this to Dr. Carla Gober Park, and I was anxious about it, and I didn't realize I was anxious. And the nurse, all these people come in and they ask you what your name is. Endlessly, these people come in, ask you what your name is, what you're doing there, what side is the surgery going to be on. One would think they would all get it the first time, right? But no, and my anxiety is going up and up and up every time somebody comes in. I didn't realize it was so obvious, but the nurse was looking at the heart monitor, and she just kept looking at it and looking at it, and she said, And then she got my wrist, and your heart's beating pretty fast, she said. I said, do I need to get worried? Well, I think I'll talk to the doctor. So she got the doctor to come in, and he looked at the situation. He said, I'll come back. So he came back, and he walked in the room, and he said, you're afraid, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. He said, I can tell because I checked your records, and your resting heartbeat's about 58. It's about 12 now, twice that now. Something really frightened me. I said, really? I am. I'm really afraid. He said, don't worry. I'll take care of you. My heart rate went zoom right down as the nurse stood there and watched it. The surgery didn't go perfectly well, so I had to go back again. And that wasn't the anesthesiologist's fault. That's the one who did this. When I saw him the second time, I said, I'm not so afraid this time. And I'm really thankful for how you called me last time, but I need you to know that if you had said, let's talk to Jesus about this, I would have hit you. Right? I needed something else. I needed the implicit witness. Here's an explicit witness. Really quickly, I had a medical student some time ago who had all the advantages for doing well in academia, and he was failing freshman year. And he asked if he could talk to me, and he was seeing a psychiatrist. He told me he was getting medicine, and I was glad for that. But he also wanted to talk about some other things. Turned out he came from a very convenient, comfortably situated family. He had gone to the best universities in the nation. And while there, some Christians had converted him to Christianity, and he didn't notice at the time that they taught him that God was going to burn everybody in hell who didn't accept God forever. And the more he thought about it, the more he thought of the billions of people who were going to be lost and who were going to die forever. And being an anxious person, he was lying awake all night long thinking about that. Now, we may think that's strange, but just think about it. If you are going to suffer forever after 1 billion years, you have just begun to suffer. And he was taking that seriously. That's what he was taught. So, I went through the Bible passage by passage by passage and showed him that that's not what Scripture says. I did not say, some people say this, some people say that. No. I gave him the clearest exposition of Scripture I could, and he got well. Right? The psychiatrist's medicine was absolutely essential, but also was the theological explication. And he's gone on to do well in medical school since, and on and on. So, okay. That's I think I have one more response, and that is, no, two. One to take a while, then the last one very briefly. I think we need to remember the virtues. We've heard a lot about faith, hope, and love. Interesting, isn't that? That's where I was going to end up too, the Christian virtues of faith, hope, and love. And twice already that has been mentioned. That should be some kind of a signal to us. In addition to that, though, I think we ought to add the Greek virtues. Wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. Put them all together, we have the 7 virtues of Western culture, and I think we ought to tend to them and cultivate them and encourage them in our lives. They have been thought of for hundreds of years by people in this culture as virtues that we ought to cultivate, both Greek ones and Christian ones, and I think we ought to take our heritage seriously in that regard. I have one last response, and that is this. Thank you, Dr. Fowler, and through you I thank all the clinicians who do so much work every day and every night for those of us who get sick. And I feel a little uncomfortable about what's happened tonight, because some of you may feel that you've been scolded, right? One's fumbling attempts to convey the gospel are now viewed with some hermeneutics of suspicion. Well, okay. You know, blurting out to some patient that God really loves him or her is not the worst sin that can be committed. I'm not trying at all to diminish the significance of things that we have heard, but I want you to go home affirmed, thanked, blessed, realizing that 85 to 95% of the time you get it right. And we're worrying about the little bit of times, few times when one might not get it right, or those few people who really are a problem and maybe should find work elsewhere. But the vast majority of you are doing the best you can under enormously stressful circumstances, and God bless you. I love you all.